Anyway, well, welcome to Visiting Writer Series with Matthew Zanoni Muller. And I'm psyched to be here, and I will start by introducing our president, Phil Sisson, who is here to say hello and welcome us.
Yeah, good afternoon, good morning, afternoon, whatever time it is. Good to see you all and in person for a change. Many of you obviously are here and doing the in-person classes, so great to have you with us. Tom, thank you as always for your leadership in this series. It's extraordinary. And Matthew, to have a professor from Berkshire Community College be part of this series is really important and great to us. So I'm excited to have you here today.
Again, welcome. I want to just some shout out thanks to Steve Rossi of the Office of Student Engagement, co-sponsor this along with the English department. Also want to thank the Dean of Liberal Arts, Matthew Olson, English department chair Jill Keller, Beth Noel of marketing helps us out. And again, today we have Matthew Zanoni Muller, who will read from his works of fiction and creative nonfiction. I'm excited to have him here. Matthew Zanoni Muller is a writer of fiction and creative nonfiction whose work has appeared in many literary journals and magazines, including Southeast Review, Nano Fiction, The Boywood Journal, Halfway Down the Stairs, and Hippocampus. A memoir he co-wrote with his father, Drops on the Water, stories about growing up from a father and son, was published by Loyola University Apprentice House Press in 2014. He was born in Germany, grew up in Eugene, Oregon, and upstate New York. He received his BA in creative writing and literature from Emerson College here in Boston, and his MFA in fiction from Warren Wilson College. Matthew is a professor of English, as was mentioned, at Berkshire Community College in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and an associate nonfiction editor at Pithead Chapel, an online literary journal and small press. The writer and reviewer Shelley Carpenter, in a review of his book, Drops on the Water, noted Matthew Muller's voice is distinct and so very personal. Many of Matthew's stories are about being in the moment, what it felt like to be in that one place at that one time. Matthew's writing is honest and quite brave in that he hits the nail straight on, capturing the shadowy side of human nature with all its angst and grace. He also layers his story with evocative detail and beautiful sentences. Excited? Help me welcome Matthew Zanoni Muller.
Take my fancy tote bag here and put it on the lectern. Thank you all so much for having me. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, President Sisson. Really appreciate being here. Thank you, Jonathan, for making the connection. Thank you to Middlesex. It's exciting to be back in a physical space. I haven't actually been to a campus since March of 2020. Just been hanging around at home and growing my beard out and, getting increasingly weird. So it was nice this morning to actually, get dressed properly and head out to see real people. So I'll read a few different things today. I'll start with a short little piece from the book, Drops on the Water, and then I'll read part of a short story, and then I'll finish by reading a little bit from a work in progress. You're all students, you all have papers due all the time, so sort of in the spirit of vulnerability, I thought I would share some of my work in progress. I peeked at it last night. It's full of typos, so I'll probably mess up here and there, but that's part of the beauty of it. So the piece I'll be reading from first is from this little book. I brought a few. There's over there. If you want one at the end, I can happily sign one for you. This was a really fun project that I started right after I graduated from undergrad from Emerson. And I did what any brave young person with an undergraduate degree will do, which is to move back in with my parents. And while I was there, I started talking to my dad about writing flash fiction, these nice, very short pieces. And he said, well, what about flash nonfiction? What about telling stories from life? And I admit I always avoided memoir courses when I was in college. I was afraid of them. I was afraid of putting myself out there. I didn't really want to tell my life stories. It takes a certain amount of guts to write about your real experiences and then have to kind of stand behind them. So I just kind of avoided all that and just fictionalized everything. But then my dad said, why don't we just write some? And I said no. And then he went on and started to write a few himself, and then he would read them to me over coffee. He'd always make coffee every morning. And so I decided I would try one as well. So he'd kind of knock on my door in the morning and say, hey, I'm going to make coffee. Come get coffee in about 10 minutes. And I'd say, okay, 10 minutes. What can I do in 10 minutes? And that's really good to have a little constraint like that, because then you just have to go as hard as you can without thinking. So I would just write as hard as I could and just see what came out. And I was surprised and shocked and happy to see that I was writing these little stories. And so we started to share them with each other, and then we kind of started to get excited and always try to have something to read to each other every weekend. And that's kind of my plug for not doing things alone. Things are much easier when you collaborate, when you have someone who is interested in what you're doing, and you're interested in what they're doing, and you can feed off of each other. I've done this with friends as well. We'll do like a poetry challenge, like write a poem a day, and you have to send it to me by midnight. And little things like that really kind of help get you motivated, and you learn so much from other people. So with this book, our idea was that we shouldn't write a story over 1,000 words long. So that's about 3 to 4 pages. And once you kind of tip over 1,000 pages, it gets a little bit longer and a little bit more involved. So the whole idea was stay short, and then you have to choose what you're going to actually put in the story. So with that constraint, it actually became much easier to choose what to write about. I didn't have this pressure to write about my life, the whole big thing, even though I was only 23. But there was something nice about having that constraint. Sometimes just giving yourself like a little picture frame that you can push out against is fun. So that was our approach. So I was born in Germany, as Tom mentioned, and quite a few of my stories are sort of about that transition from coming from Germany and then living in America. And my father was born in South Africa, and then he lived all over in Europe as well, and then eventually in America. So his stories are about that as well. So I'll just read a short piece, which is kind of about me, kind of about my older brother, and kind of about my mom. I timed it, it's about 6 minutes long. So if you're an antsy person, just know that's what you have to suffer through, and should be okay. So this one is called Stairs. I'm terrible at titles. I probably could have thought of something better, but Stairs it is. So here we go. I'm standing with my brother at the big window in our apartment in Bochum, Germany. We are on the top floor, and there are little cars below us and miniature people walking. My brother points to the other children in the sandbox, to the mothers in little circles around them. He points to the bridge that the train will go over. We wait for the train. He is teaching me what he knows about the world. I remember that we are very calm. Then the sound of a siren comes. It is there to pick up sick people, he explains. We wait for the ambulance to pass in the street to see whether it will turn into the parking lot of our apartment building. While we wait, we mimic the sound. Ta-too, ta-ta. They sound different in Europe. Until it storms past and we clap our hands. The next year we move to America. We live in a big green house, or at least for us it is big, because it has 2 stories. My brother and I get a room upstairs, and when our first American friends come to the house, I have my mother teach me my first English phrase. Come upstairs and see, I yell at them when they walk through the door before I run up to show them my room. I love the house because all of the floors are covered in carpet. It is a very dark house, and there are large oak trees outside. Inside, it feels like one is underwater. I pad very softly over the carpet and go from room to room in the long mornings, when my brother is at kindergarten and my father is at work and my mother is all alone with me, also new to America, my young mother. When my brother comes home from school, we run around outside or sit up in our room. My brother takes his little blue handkerchief and sticks it in his nose and twirls it and licks off the snot, and one time he tells me to lick it too. It is salty and I do not like it. He likes to have all four corners covered in snot so that he can make little horns when the snot dries. I have my own version of the handkerchief. My mother really wanted a girl for her second child, but instead she got me. When she was pregnant, she bought lots of pink things. Now I carry around a long piece of pink silk cloth, and I always have it around my thumb, and I put the thumb in my mouth and let the rest drag behind my feet. And my mother has to keep it out of the dirt because I don't care what end goes in my mouth. She always tries to tuck it into my back pocket, but I pull it out again, and she stumbles after me, trying to put it back in. My brother and I always try to avoid nap times and going to bed and taking baths. When it is nap time, we run out into the yards that my mother has to chase us to force us in. We do not go willingly. It's our job to run and hers to chase. When it is bath time, we get in like two very well-behaved boys, and when she turns around, my brother puts his penis out of the water and makes a little fountain. And then I make a little fountain too, and that's when she turns back and sees the whole bath is ruined, and we have to start all over. We keep doing it each bath time until one day my brother poops, and then it isn't fun anymore. At bedtime, we run around too, up and down the stairs, into my parents' bedroom to cuddle, up and hide in their blankets, and then finally into our room and under our covers, and then in the darkness we whisper to each other. My brother one night whispers down to me that he has a fun idea. He says he is coming to my bunk. I love it when he comes to my bunk. He comes down and says it is the best plan, but that we have to be very quiet for it to work. He tells me the plan and I agree. This is the plan. First, we take all of our toys from their shelves and from under the bed. Then we put them in a big pile by the door, and then, very quickly, we open the door and throw them all down the stairs. We have a hard time containing our excitement, and we hold our sides so that we do not laugh. My brother grins at me with his empty front teeth when he opens the door and starts throwing things down. First it is the stuffed animals because they are soft and won't make much noise. I watch my bear bounce happily down, and then my tiger and my brother's elephant. Then come the blocks and the books and the trucks. We hear voices from my parents' room and see a light come on under their door. We know it is beginning and start to giggle with glee. And then in a big push, we move the whole pile to the stairs and push it down and fall after it screaming. And that is when my mother comes to the top of the stairs in her nightrobe and stands there like a pale, angry ghost. We hold on to each other's arms from the bottom of the stairs and look up giddy and terrified at my mother's white silhouette with the hall light behind her, and we hear her swear. When she swears, all the air is suddenly out of the stairwell. It isn't funny anymore because she never swears. We try to laugh louder to convince her it is funny, but her words rip it away. She does not yell. She just says, "Scheisse, scheisse, scheisse," and pumps her fists up and down. The scariest thing is that she does not see us. She doesn't even look at us. All she sees is the mess, and she keeps repeating the swear word, the word we are not meant to hear and never to say. But now she doesn't care if we hear it because she does not see us. We do not matter enough to be protected anymore. The toys have made us disappear. We crawl away from the bottom of the stairs. We go to the front door and hide in the coat closet. Through the bottom of the coats, we see her white shadow come down and stare at the pile. She does not move. We hear my father come down out of their room and then see her move away from the pile. She sits at the table with her hair over her face, crying quietly, all to herself, like we are dead. We sit together with the coats over us, watching her, with something dreadful in our stomachs, until my father's dark form scoops us up and takes us back to our dark and empty room and leaves us there. The curtains are open, and a little bit of light from the street lamp is coming in. We try to listen for sounds, but hear nothing from downstairs. No steps coming back up, no lights flicked on. I hear cars going by in the street outside, and somewhere farther away a siren driving fast. But it sounds nothing like the ones in Germany. It will keep driving farther away until the sound disappears, leaving us all here. So this book, obviously I wrote most of my stories when I was 23, 24, and then went to grad school, kind of kept going back to them and revising them, sending them to magazines and so on. And the book didn't come out until I was about 30. So it's a pretty long time between sort of starting a book and putting it out, but that's sort of the writing world for you. I think sometimes we get in this sort of trap of wanting to write something very quickly and get it out there and have it in the world, but writing is really a marathon, right? You're not going to do it very quickly, and you have to sort of commit to just staying with it. So it's always this long process. I just finished another collection this summer, and I realized the first story I wrote for that one was in 2010. And so, now it's 2021, so about 11 years later. And of course, it wasn't the only thing I worked on. But, it's this long haul that you sort of have to just kind of move through, and then you sit with these pieces. And I have this kind of terrible habit of probably revising things way more than I should. But I can't help it, and then, I'll leave something for a year, and I'll go back and look at it again, and it's still not good, or there's one paragraph I don't know what to do with, so then I leave it for another 6 months. So it just takes a while, right? Of course, some writers are faster, and some writers have more time, so that's all part of it. So I'll move now to a short story, a piece of fiction. And I think one of the sort of interesting things for me between moving from creative nonfiction to fiction is that the whole point with nonfiction is you're trying to understand something that happened in your life. And you're trying to, if you're writing about someone in your life, to render them as kind of clearly and truthfully as possible. Who is this actual person? What do they look like? What's their personality? Who are they? What are they motivated by? And that exercise is really interesting because you get to know the people in your life much better. And you're kind of trying your best to get it right. Now in fiction, it's very different because you're just creating people out of thin air and you don't really have that responsibility to anybody. So it's a very different kind of exercise. And the piece I'll read came to me as kind of like one of those like what if scenarios. So my what if question, and it's fun to ask what if questions and then try to answer it with a story. I began to notice, and maybe you've noticed this too, like you go to a store, right? And you buy a phone. Very quickly you'll get something in your email or in your text asking you for a survey of your experience. And the same thing happens at work. I began to notice how often we were sending surveys out after every event we had, or we'd send out little Google forms for events, and you had to click through the different, little buttons. And I began to get curious about what is that overlap between sort of personal life and professional life and tech, and what is this sort of doing to us as people when we're constantly asked for our feedback in this way and expect it, and expect to gather data on our personal lives or our emotions or our experiences. And what is that kind of data obsession leading to? So I thought of this story, and it kind of came to me fully baked one morning. It was like the microwave goes bing, and it's like, okay, here's my story, and then I just had to sit down and write it. And I was very annoyed because about 2/3 of the way through I ran out of time and had to go to the dentist. And the dentist is kind of a jarring thing, there's someone drilling at your mouth. And then kind of going back and trying to pick up the pieces was difficult, but I tried to just finish it that day. But there's something interesting about that process of writing, where it's sort of you just think about something and you let it percolate, and then when it's ready, you just go, and you try to drop everything else and ignore everybody, and then apologize later. It's difficult when you have a deadline for a class. You can't do that. But whenever you can, it's sort of worth trying. So I'll just read a little bit of this piece, maybe the first half, to give you a sense. And I guess I wrote this one maybe 2-3 years ago, so it's more recent. So this one's called Field Survey. His name was Michael, and he was looking up at something outside of the frame of the picture, and his grinning white teeth were visible through the darkness of his beard. She scrolled down. Body type, athletic. Pets, dog. Occupation, field of education. Political leanings, I'll tell you once I know you. Well, that wasn't very helpful. She opened the messenger function, clicked on the text box, and watched the cursor blink on and off under the message he had sent. Hey, you seem like a nice person. It's hard to find good people nowadays. Meet up to see if you feel the same? This seemed very quick. She had read that you were supposed to have 4 distinct exchanges before planning to meet. She looked over the top of her monitor at the counter with the spider plant spilling over it and the bank of computers beyond. Sure, why not? Name the place and the time. She was taking a risk. She could now be described as a risk taker. At the coffee shop, Michael was indeed athletic, bearded, and seemed like a nice person. Why didn't you put your political leanings up? Were you afraid to drive people away? He ran his hand thoughtfully through his beard. I guess I just think politics divides people. You put something like that up and then people put you in a box. But wouldn't that happen anyway? I mean, wouldn't your date put you in a box once you told them? Yes, but then you can engage in conversation. Ah, she said. Luckily, their political views were aligned and didn't necessitate much conversation, except to gripe and commiserate about the current state of things. They spent more time on each other's occupations, his as a special ed teacher. He was currently working to get his hours so he could apply for licensure, which he was doing to effect positive change since his parents had, in his words, done enough damage to the world through all their corporate racketeering. She told him about her work as an administrative assistant in charge of a student success center. It was her job to put together a variety of events for the director of the Center for Student Success, and to follow up with student concerns, and to make sure that the director's correspondences and scheduling needs were all attended to. She liked the work. It was, for the most part, precise. After all, I like to be organized. Clarity and cleanliness are important to me. Yes, cleanliness, he said, though there was something dirty in his voice, as if he was imagining her body. She changed the subject back to his work and learned how he had sat with one boy for over an hour and had tried to get him to thread beads onto a string to work on fine motor skills. It had not been very successful, and the boy had again and again covered his hand in drool. By the end, though, we had 3 beads on that string, and I have to tell you, it felt like the biggest accomplishment of my life. It was amazing how relative success is, right? Right. At the end of their date, they hugged, but did not kiss. And because it was the afternoon, Diana still went to her tennis lesson, where she worked with her coach on her backhand swing. Her mother had told her it was important to maintain healthy habits. When she got home that evening, she put together a survey and sent Michael the link. The questions were as follows. 1. How attractive did you find your date? Rate 1 through 10. 2. How compelling did you find the conversation? Rate 1 through 10. 3. What is the likelihood of a second date? Rate 1 through 10. The answers were returned the following morning. 10, 8, 9. Good, she thought. Her first date had been a success. She opened the text messaging app and wrote, looks like we could improve on number 2. Meet up this Wednesday night for dinner? 2 hours later, her phone buzzed with a response. You are too funny. Yes, Wednesday sounds lovely. La Fagata on 9th, 8 o'clock. She didn't understand why she was too funny, or how someone could be too funny. Was there any such thing as being too funny, like having too much fun or too much candy? Maybe she was making him sick. I don't want you to get sick with me, though, she wrote. Impossible, he wrote back. But hadn't he just said? She let it rest. Wednesday night was wonderful. They both ate spaghetti bolognese and drank red wine that left many little pieces of itself at the bottom of their glasses. They talked about political developments, and he told her stories about the children, how sometimes it took more time to prepare for the day's classroom activity than the actual activity. He told her how important it was to get the children involved, how it mattered that they not only get a classmate's coloring book out of the bin, but that they actually deliver that book to the appropriate classmate. Think what that means, to actually recognize and deliver a book to one of your classmates, and of course, to be recognized. This idea made her flush with such happiness that she reached across the table, took his hand, pulled him toward her, and they kissed over a bouquet of silk red roses. They made plans to meet again the following Saturday, and he helped her into an Uber. The next morning, she sent him another survey. It had only one question. 1. How much did you like our first kiss? Rate 1 through 10. He did not fill out the survey as instructed, but instead texted her the number 10 with 4 exclamation points. While she was initially upset that he hadn't used the survey app, she happily filled in the answer for him to keep the data intact. The next Saturday, after they saw a play, he invited her back to his place. He made food in his kitchen, and they talked about the dating experiences both had had. He told her that he had been using the app for the past 6 months and had somehow never managed to get past a 4th date with someone. Maybe I'm picky, he said. Or maybe you just haven't found the right woman. They smiled at each other, and then he came and gave her a long kiss, leaning over the counter. They had started kissing a lot that day because they had kissed the last time over dinner, and so now it was allowed. I've only been on the app for a month, she told him. No one answered the surveys as well as you. He turned from the stove and said, I thought the surveys were just a special thing between us. She looked at him a bit bewildered. I'm joking, he said. I use the same first line with you that I use with all my dates. This didn't help to clear up her bewilderment very much. Why would he use the same first line? Why would he think her surveys were special? That night, they kissed on his couch, and she allowed his hands to unclasp her bra. Later, she took him into her mouth, and when he came, she swallowed it without hesitation. She did not allow him to take off her underwear. As they lay together, he told her a story about the smallest boy in the class named Grant, who was deaf and was learning sign language, which was difficult because of his poor motor functioning, and who used the PECS card exchange communication method. He's a loner, Michael said, and he goes off during recess and lies on the middle post of a fence and leans into the chicken wire they put up for backing. But I think he wants attention too. You know what he does? While he's lying there, he takes his shoes off and throws them over the fence. Yeah, and that way someone has to go get them. They have to bring them back to him and put them on his feet. After he told her this story, he looked into her eyes for a long time, his mouth in a mysterious smile. Isn't that a wonderful strategy? She nodded. She imagined Michael gently putting shoes on the boy's feet, and then she imagined him putting them on her feet, and then she curled into his large, warm chest. The next day, she sent him 2 links. The first was to a survey which asked the following questions. Level of satisfaction with breast size, rate 1 through 10. Level of satisfaction with sexual activities, rate 1 through 10. Desire for date to swallow semen in the future, rate 1 through 10. The answers came back in somewhat predictable form, except for the last one. 10, 10, 11. He was breaking the rules. Frustrated, she erased number 11, which he had written in the field marked Other, and clicked the bubble with the number 10 above it. But now she felt that perhaps her data was no longer accurate. Again, she rubbed her temples in frustration. Plus, he seemed to answer 10 a lot. She surmised that this was because he wanted to please her, which was skewing the results. Maybe she could add an honesty clause or terms of agreement. But it was better than nothing. She had gotten used to working with what she had. Many of her students didn't even bother filling out the surveys she sent after orientation, or when there had been a workshop on using their online LMS. This had also been the case with 2 of her other dates, Craig and Daniel, both of whom had opted not to fill out the survey. Craig had also opted not to return any of her messages. Daniel, on the other hand, had written back that she was crazy. Who the fuck sends out a satisfaction survey after a date? She had written back that she couldn't speak for others, but obviously the answer is that I do. Obviously, he had written back. She hadn't known what to respond to that, and so she hadn't said anything at all, and neither had he. They had never seen each other again. I think I'll stop there. So I sometimes feel like I'm a little bit torn inside between writing stories that are more like that, which kind of have a concept. Like I just wrote this other one recently, which most people haven't really liked, but that I like a lot. And it's a kind of a weird story because basically it's called Eat Me. And in it, people kind of come up to the main character and they'll just like take bites out of him and like, rip off little pieces of his body. And this is kind of a normal thing in that concept, but it's sort of the ways in which we, sort of like emotionally abuse one another, right? We just sort of eat each other up, and some people give a lot more of themselves than others, right? So I kind of liked that concept. It's kind of a gross story, so I don't think I'm having much luck with it. But I sort of enjoy taking concepts and then trying to think through how it would actually work. So that's kind of like the one half of my fiction writing life that I sort of enjoy and that keeps me intellectually engaged. And I usually find the stories kind of funny even when they're sad. So then I have this like other part of myself, which I kind of wish I could just get rid of, but there it is. And it takes up way more of my time. And that's the part of myself that writes fiction that is sort of loosely based on my life, sort of like autofiction or something along those lines. So I'm taking events from my life or people in my life, and then I'm fictionalizing them. And the sort of the big difference there between creative nonfiction and then these ones which are close to my life, and this is kind of the part that feels bad, is that I sort of feel like I'm betraying what really happened. And maybe worse, I'm taking events from my life that were meaningful to me, which is why I'm writing about them, but then I'm kind of changing all the details and I'm putting them in a totally different order. And probably by doing that and working on it again and again, I'm actually erasing my real memories. So like Mary Carr in her great book on craft sort of warns against doing that. And I kind of see what she's saying, because once you start to fictionalize stuff and kind of shift it and mold it, there's a weird kind of thing where you begin to wonder, well, was that actually the way it happened, or did I just tell the story that way? And so where does the truth live? And yet, I'm finding that it tends to be the most meaningful way for me to do this work. That's something about fictionalizing it and having that sort of freedom of fiction mixed with the way that I think fiction tries to build meaning. So I think creative nonfiction often finds meaning, and and fiction has to kind of build the meaning. So it's a little bit of a different way of sort of thinking about my life and thinking about events in my life. So I'm on sabbatical right now, which basically means I get to hang around and write and read all day, which is very nice. And so I applied for this through my institution, and I had to kind of have a project for this. So the project I came up with is to write a novel called Resident Alien. And I was very bummed because there's a show that recently came out on TBS called Resident Alien, and it's literally about aliens that like come to Earth. I was like, oh, it took my title. But if you don't know, green cards used to be called Resident Alien cards. And then in the 90s, they kind of figured out that that might be alienating to people. And so they changed it to permanent resident. But when I got my green card, when I came to the States, mine was still a resident alien card. So I sort of became interested in that idea of being alien or feeling foreign. And so I began to think a lot about my parents' life, and especially what it must have been like for my mother to come to America from Germany, having lived there her whole life and feeling very connected to where she lived and her culture and all of that, and then moving to America as a kind of an alien. And I kind of realized that if I had this focus of writing about alienation in sort of every chapter in one form or another, it was a nice way to kind of have some focus for this book. So that's the project that I applied with, and I've been working on it quite a lot, and it's been really fun. I need a schedule, so I usually get up at 5. I bought myself a little Mr. Coffee that you can like preload the night before, and then at 5 o'clock in the morning it starts brewing. And then once it's been sitting there for like half an hour, it's less good. So I'm like kind of motivated to get up and get the fresh cup. which is helpful. The other thing about getting up at 5, no one is texting you yet. No one is asking you questions. No one expects you to do anything. The dog is still sleeping and doesn't want to go out. So it's kind of this nice quiet time where like you can just hang out. So even when like I'm not working, it's weird how like if I start at 10, there's so many more distractions. So I really kind of realized I was like, okay, I have to protect my time, and I have to like have my little sanctuary of silence. So think about that in your own lives, right? Like, where are those places, and at what times are you able to get good work done? And then just kind of stick to that. It'll change your life. So I thought I would just share this section of the novel. It's the last thing I'll read. How am I doing on time? And I chose this section because it features sort of the main character's time as a student. And in the novel, she applied to art school and didn't get in. So she's kind of bummed about this. And so she's at a teacher's college where she's taking an art class, but no one's really there to be artists. They're just there to do art, to learn how to teach. And she's very self-important and wants to do real art, but is also sort of struggling with that. And then also has 2 young kids, and is sort of balancing all that. This part still takes place in Germany, so I haven't gotten them over the pond yet. So I'll just read some of this. In my memory, it was really short. Then I started printing it out, and I was like, oh. So I'll just stop at some point when it feels appropriate. One thing to know, so this part of this takes place in a town called Wuppertal, if I get there. And they have what's called a Schwebebahn, which basically means like a floating train. And so if you imagine like a big metal arch with a track on the top running through the town, and there's like a train hanging from the track. So that's their public transportation in Wuppertal. It's very cool. Mm-hmm. So I remember going there and being very interested in that idea of sort of floating through a city, metaphorically. Okay, and like I said, this is my first draft, super rough. So please be very judgmental, and you can throw stuff at me. So this is called Wuppertal. On an assignment, my mother took the train to Wuppertal to visit the Von der Heydt Museum. She was meant to choose a piece of art, to study it, and to apply the Goethean color theory. She was studying now and had days away from her children while Pierre stayed home to watch them. She had enrolled at the Witten-Annet-Institut für Waldorfpädagogik, where she was taking art classes. It's fun to say long German words, sorry. And classes on theosophy and on the developmental stages of the child. But she resented the other students. They were not artists, not real artists. They wanted to be teachers, and even Matilda, with her long dark hair, her long spidery fingers, whose charcoal lines so perfectly and naturally captured the weight and breadth of the outline of the sagging model's shoulders, was there to be a teacher. Matilda, whose natural talent my mother knew was beyond hers. She would sit behind her and watch her hand on the easel, watch how a stuffed fox on a chair in the center of the room became warped or injured and shrunk or elongated on the canvases of the others, only to appear so naturally, so perfectly on Matilda's paper, as if the fox were not stuffed at all, but had come out of the woods, slunk down a sagging fence, and appeared there on the paper. And the greatest, the most stunning stroke of all, was that just when the fox had reached life with a few small strokes, Ulrika killed it. I changed her name, sorry. Matilda killed it, stuffed it, and presented it there on the canvas, dead and blank-eyed. She was a genius, a natural, and so moody and difficult, holding her cup of coffee and leaning on the counter afterward, talking to no one, waiting for the critique. My mother had said, "Wie schön dein Fuchs ist," but she hadn't said anything back, just looked into her coffee, and then, during the critique, when my mother's drawing came up, she raised her hand and said, "The lines are too wild, and they are too soft. The fox should be apprehended and then drawn." This drawing swirled and hoped for a fox to appear. And then she looked at my mother, her long thin arms cradling the orange cup at her waist, and her eyes were not cold, or mean or judgmental. They were making sure that she had understood the problem with her drawing. Matilda didn't need my mother to tell her that her fox was nice. She knew it was a good fox, and she knew why it was good, and how she had made it good, and now she was telling my mother why hers was not. Did she understand? Danke, my mother said. Thank you. Matilda said nothing and turned her eyes back to the front and waited for the next drawing to come up for critique. She would be a terrifying teacher, my mother thought. Even if I never become an artist, I will be a better teacher. But it was an artist that my mother wanted to be. And how could she teach if she wasn't an artist herself? And what Matilda had said was true. She had made light strokes on the paper, many light strokes, circular, quick, and out of them she was beginning to lift the fox, to create him, to raise him from the paper, to see him in the maelstrom of all her light strokes. And that was how he appeared to her, distant there in the mist of her thin, delicate lines, so that in the end it was the lines one saw surrounding the fox, as if he had come out of the coils of wire, trying to wriggle himself free, and he was much too alive. When the assignment was given to study a piece of art at the Von der Heydt Museum, she had known exactly which one she would choose. She had seen it in high school on a trip, The Fox by Franz Marc. A black fox lying on his paws in a clearing. How injured he appeared, how free of humans. She would take the train, study the fox, and then go to the zoo to choose an animal herself, a live one, and practice the methods she had observed. When she arrived at the Hauptbahnhof, she walked through Elberfeld to the museum and was momentarily so happy to be away from Bochum, from Witten-Annen, and from her family that she could almost imagine herself again as the girl in the black coat, walking through a square in Vienna on the way to a museum to study a painting. And though she was wearing a gray coat, she didn't mind this at all. When she passed a cigarette dispensing machine, she stopped, remembered her uncle, the doctor in the gray suit, pressing a coin into her hand and telling her to run off. Hol mir mal eine Packe, ja, meine Liebling? And off she went, skirt flaring. She slid the coin in, pushed the button, pulled the lever with a thunk, and down dropped the package of red Gauloise. She searched the bottom of her leather bag for a lighter and found a small, smooth shape with her fingertips. It was the lighter she used sometimes for the candles at the side of Bruno's bed when she sang him to sleep and said a prayer into the flickering dark with his large eyes staring up at her like a small, holy animal himself. She settled against a stone wall, cocked her hip, mussed with the plastic, ripped it off, opened the pack, folded up very carefully the foil, and struggled out a cigarette. She put it to her lips, squinted, and lit the tip. And here, the first drag, the one she had waited for. She took it in long, as if she were taking in all the air in the square, the air in which no one knew she had a family, in which she was anonymous, free, and she breathed that in, felt the tingle in her limbs, at her fingertips, and exhaled in a long, luxurious plume that rolled out into the air in front of her and unstuck everything in her chest so that it tumbled out afterward. She took a few more slow drags just like that, and then the same thing that always happened. Her mouth got dry, she began to hate the taste, and before she was done, she threw it in a gutter and walked off. The smoke clung to her and trailed along as she walked, as the image fell into her mind that always fell into her mind when she was unhappy with her life, of Pierre falling backward on the couch, his wide mouth like a lion's, laughing, his long hair splayed behind him, his tight blue sweater, the one with the black horizontal strips that hugged his body so close, and both children falling over him, squealing and giggling and careful, and his forearms catching their backs as he pulled them onto him, and his large hands all mixed up in their hair, the large hands with their visible veins and knobby knuckles that could clang up and down the piano and turn the apartment into a music hall. However could she be unhappy? However could she? She lit another cigarette, and this time smoked the whole thing and loitered around the outside of the museum entrance. Then she strode right in, paid her ticket, and went right for the fox. It was easy to spot the Goethean color theory. The planes of color were all separate. There was yellow, the color closest to light, and it was left alone by the other colors. They didn't try to come in and damage it, the light. There was green around it, but the yellow hadn't been poisoned into green. There was a light right over the fox, right over its back. And the blue, the masculine color, according to Mark, in a serene pool welling from his neck, and the fox itself lying on a patch of green, that admixture of color, of sickness or peace. And here, right under his body, turning a milder yellow color, as though softening under it, as though holding the fox, as underneath his patch of green, a river of red poured through where the male and female, as Mark had understood them, met each other. But it was the fox itself, which lay on the grass in shades of purple and black, seemingly without forepaws, just the one back leg and the tail wrapped close around it, and the long neck laid out into the green, the grass, its snout right against it, black and wet and close against each blade. The jaw was a lightened strip, right under the dark slit of the eye, the sleek head, the nuzzling posture. But it was the black she liked best, the darkness of the fox, and here's where Goethe had been right. Black wasn't just an absence of light, it was its own color, its own force, and it lived in all the other colors and lived in this fox too, was spread through him, through his sleek neck and brow, down through the nose and the grass. Geschmeidigkeit, that fox, as it wrapped around her legs, as its tail brushed the side of her hand, as it turned in a circle in the small clearing and lay itself down. That darkness in it, purple like night, through which the fox had moved, itself the shadow, and taking the shadow into its body and carrying it along so that when the long jaw and the sharp teeth closed around the chicken's neck, it, the shadow, had come, that had materialized to take the chicken and turn it limp in its claws and take off. And the fox, after days of not eating, now lay down along the grass, not sad, but alone, the way a fox is alone, so that one human hand reaches for its back to stroke its length, and the guard jumps from the corner and says, "Nicht so nah, bitte," and she has forgotten all about the space between her and this creature. She carries it out of the museum, coiled and dark inside her. I'll stop there.
Well, plenty of time for question and answer, and would love to hear your questions for Matthew. All yours.
Yeah.
What year did you move from Germany to the United States?
So I was very young. I got here in August, and I turned 3 in September, so I was almost 3. So I have a few memories of Germany, probably only because I moved. I think if I hadn't moved, right, that part of my life probably would have been a blank, but there are kind of a few images that stayed with me. And then we went back a lot, more or less every year. We'd go back and visit family, so, in the summer. But I haven't been back in, 6 years or so. So, yeah.
Can I ask, just thinking about your movement and also your father's movement, and whether you think or how much you think that may have contributed to your interest in writing and being able to be an outsider and see some things differently than maybe people within that one space, and whether that contributed somehow to your ability to see in some different ways.
I mean, there's a lot of writing on this, right? This sort of double consciousness of the immigrant, so that you see yourself within the culture, and then you can also take that step outside. I was kind of in a weird position. I feel like my answer to all these questions is always like, kind of. Like, I'm more or less an American dude, right? Like, I don't really have an accent. Like, you wouldn't know that I was German if I walked down the street necessarily. I actually look more Swiss maybe than German. So, like, in many ways, I'm not really an immigrant, right? I came here when I was very young. On the other hand, German was my first language. I can still read German. I still talk to my relatives in German. It's a part of my life. My mom has a very thick accent. My dad has a kind of like sexy South African accent. So it's like, there are ways in which I am I do have a little bit of that. But it's kind of it's been an interesting thing to navigate, I think, in this book, kind of thinking about what does it mean to be an immigrant in America, especially when you might not necessarily look like an immigrant, right? And all the kind of privileges that come with that. And then, so how do you kind of write about that in a way that feels, politically important? So it's been something I've been thinking about a lot, sort of my place in all of that. Yeah?
The first 2 pieces that you read, they were short pieces separate from the book you were reading, correct?
The first piece I read was from the book. And then, yeah, the other two were separate, yeah.
I guess the third piece that you read, what kind of experiences were you drawing from when you read that, or wrote that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I have been calling my parents a lot, and I have a kind of a disclaimer, like, can you tell me about this? And also I may use it or not use it, and I may completely warp it, and I'm so sorry. And then they kind of share with me what they're comfortable with. So when I kind of realized by doing that, I think I got a little too into doing that. And so they would tell me a lot of stuff, like about their time living in Germany or going to art school. And I began to realize that what I was writing down was actually their story. And I was gathering too many details. And so when I would sit down to write, I was just sort of transcribing it and fleshing it out. And I became less and less happy, because I think a lot of the sort of excitement in writing comes out of the surprise of discovering something you didn't expect, or of kind of moving intuitively through a story and trying to understand someone. So this section, I wrote it pretty early on in the process of writing the book, and I hadn't really talked to my mom much at all. I just sort of knew that she had, taken some art classes. And so I was just kind of filling in a lot of blanks and just sort of having fun, like spending time with this character. She then like goes to the zoo and like has a run-in with another student and stuff. So I just kind of hung out with her for the day. And by doing that, I ended up learning a lot more about this character. And I think some later sections, that they're just not very good. There isn't much life in them, just because I kind of felt like I was just transcribing stuff. So I have some memories of Wuppertal, mostly from going back to visit later. I also just spent a lot of time on Google. So if you want to like spend an evening, you can look up on YouTube. They have a bunch of videos of the Schwebebahn, and some of them are like 15 to 20 minutes long, and they're just like set to music, and you just watch the trains pull in and out. And there's you can kind of go into like a trance state and just sort of watch them move through town. So I did that because I wanted to know what color are the seats, are they plastic or are they cushiony? How do you get on the train? How high are you? All this stuff. There's a kind of a famous story of Tuffy the elephant in the 50s. When they built it, they put Tuffy the elephant, who was a baby elephant, on the Schwebebahn as like a marketing ploy for it. And he like went on, and he, the train started to move, and then he freaked out, and he broke through a window, and he jumped out, and he landed down in the Wupper, the river. So it was a kind of a disaster. But the train was able to hold him and everything. He just, had a panic attack. He was fine. He survived the fall, which maybe was also good marketing. Like, if it does fall, you'll probably live. So I sort of end with that. But, those were kind of like little things that you sort of find by just the beauty of Google. It's just awesome. I mean, nothing better has ever happened to writers than Google. Like, Google Maps. I can go to Street View and like walk past my old apartment in Germany. I don't have to buy a plane ticket. It's awesome. It's the best thing. And obviously it's 20 years later or whatever, but so great. So I spend a lot of time on Google at 5 in the morning. Yeah.
Kind of funny you mentioned using Google and looking up stuff, because I connect this back to my own personal thing. I do a lot of art. I do it for fun.
Yeah.
So I draw, I do digital art. But a big thing is references.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get in the habit currently of actually gathering my references and having them not just to be able to look at them, but to remember my thought process.
Yeah.
So I find it interesting that even as a writer, which is art in itself,
Yeah.
you're also looking for references
All the time.
all the time.
Yeah, because I mean, you're trying on the one hand to make something feel real,
Yeah.
and then on the other hand, you have to have that kind of, you want to get inspired by the actuality of the thing. So, for example, that painting of the fox, I printed it out and I had it by my workstation. I just stared at it for like an hour, and you can tell like that paragraph is probably about 2/3 too long. It's like, and I was like, and then there's another color. So like you can kind of get carried away, but that's exciting, right? That's the fun part.
I did get a little lost during that paragraph. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, what the fuck?
You and me both. Yeah, I had no idea where we were. I was like, now he's killing a chicken. Yeah, I don't know. You and then you?
You first.
Okay.
I go first? I don't really have a question, but I want to say on your first story, when you started it, the setting was so alive. And the other interesting thing is I was like, whoever's saying this is really, really small. And now you're saying that you were possibly 3, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, probably at that point I was about 2.
But that came through, and that's in your story so well. I just wanted to tell you that it was fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah.
And also I would say, you seem like your sensibilities and the way you read is really good. Like I can tell you're a very good professor. Just throwing that out there. And I was
Where's
born
my
and
boss?
raised in Pittsfield, by the way.
Sorry?
I was born and raised in Pittsfield.
Oh,
so
you are? Oh, great.
I know Berkshire Community College.
Yeah, cool. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
I mean, there's something weird about writing from the perspective of a 2-year-old because you really have to kind of live back into it. And I keep thinking that I don't know if I could have written this book now because so many of these memories were much closer to me. So basically the book follows a trajectory from when I'm like 2 to when I'm about 24.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those memories, they kind of start to fade or they just don't feel as immediate. So there's something to be said for, people say, well, wait until you're in your 70s to write your memoirs. And it's like, no, like write them now. Like you may change them later, but get it down.
Mm-hmm.
Keep a journal. You and then.
You want to go first?
Go ahead.
Were you referencing personal experience when you were talking about the cigarette dispenser and fumbling for the lighter? Because sometimes that happens to me. If I pull out a lighter, I'll think about what I used it for the day before or what I usually use it for.
There's just smoking everywhere in Germany, and I admit there's just nothing nicer than like sitting at a cafe in Berlin with a cold pilsner and a cigarette. And they're just everywhere. They have all these cigarette dispensers. It's very unhealthy.
Smoking is viewed as negative, but I like how sentimental it was when you reference it to lighting the candles.
Yeah.
That's what it feels to me.
Thank you. Yeah, so that, obviously I was kind of trying to write a little bit about her having like a sort of day of freedom, right? She can go and do her art and have a cigarette and won't get in trouble. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was interested in the narrator of the first piece and then the piece that's in progress, and wondering, I had a similar thought of the wonderful way in which you created this very young narrator in that first piece, just in the spareness of the writing, the simplicity, it was really lovely. And then I was wondering, for this, I guess for the work in progress, what the narrative distance is, like how old is the narrator, and also decisions like you're talking about, like this sort of auto-fictive sort of in between CNF or like creative nonfiction and fiction. The choice to say my mother versus to give her a name, I was wondering how you thought through that too.
Yeah. So I wrote like the first story that sort of became like the sort of impetus for this book when I was a sophomore in college, when I was, 20. And I had this, like the narrator was the son of this mother, and he was narrating stuff he couldn't possibly know about, right? Like the thing with the cigarettes.
Yeah.
And then my teacher was like, well, you can't do that. And I was like, but I just did. And so it kind of brings up a weird question about like, what is the logic of fiction? And if you break that logic, then like, have you committed a crime against the reality you're building in the story? And the answer is like logically yes. So sort of the answer that I've been giving myself, because I just somehow couldn't move away from this point of view, I just was attached to it, was that it's a narrator roughly my age who is going back and just thinking through this stuff and is trying to imagine his way into this life. And so it's really an act of imagination. And so I have to figure out, I think, how to kind of get that across to the reader, that like I'm breaking this logic of the reality of the fiction, which is also doesn't really make sense. Basically to tell this story and to imagine my way into my fake mother's life, who isn't really my mother but kind of is. That's the other thing that's weird. So like I'm basing a lot of stuff on my mom, and like I'm taking like the general path of her life. But once you change like a couple things about someone, it's so weird how they change. They become different people. So I find this too, like if I write a story that's pretty close to like my experience, I try to just give myself like a couple things that aren't true of me. And then all of a sudden it's like this new person appears. And then it's not me anymore. And so I can kind of still write through my stuff, but it's not actually me. And so I find that very interesting about writing through this character who definitely is not my mom. And so I feel kind of less guilty doing this project, though it is kind of weird because she's probably going to read it at some point, like, what is going on here? But yeah, it's a strange thing. It's a strange thing. Thank you.
I'm just going to say the cigarettes were brought up, and just the ways that you use objects symbolically, and the difference between, that character breathing and taking in the air of the square and throwing away the cigarette, and later decidedly smoking that cigarette and determinedly heading into the museum is wonderful in showing those emotions with the actions of something like a cigarette. It's just wonderful. And does that feel like conscious? Does that something that you turn back to build on? I don't know.
So, I really struggled, I think, putting ideas into action in my fiction for many years. I tend to be sort of like I think in terms of concepts, and so then I would just sort of tell people like, what they were supposed to feel. Like, the mom was unhappy or she felt very freed. And, your teachers probably tell you like show, don't tell and stuff. So that we're kind of supposed to kind of guess how someone is feeling based on what they do. But then I had a really hard time with that too, because I somehow had a hard time starting with the action. And I think kind of what I've come to over the years is it's really just a lot about intuition and sort of just allowing yourself to spend time with a character and sort of think through why they would be doing what they're doing. And not to worry too much about, hey, maybe I'm just going to tell now for a few paragraphs. And then when it feels appropriate to jump into like a scene or to jump into an action, that'll come naturally, and it'll usually come at the point where the action really has to happen. And so kind of just trusting that a little bit more has, I think, been a big part of it. And then like the other thing, I don't know, like I used to just be very dreamy, and I didn't like the real world. I wouldn't put dialogue in my stories because it felt too jarring. I didn't put like brands, like no one was wearing Nikes. No one took an Uber. Like it somehow just felt too real. It wasn't like in my little dream world. So just like living in the world for longer has helped me to like make it more real. Like usually I would have, like if I were younger, I would have just said cigarettes instead of giving them a brand like Gauloise. So, I don't know, there's just something about sort of feeling a little bit more anchored in the world and then being able to jump to the symbolic. So, yeah.
Well,
sorry.
Yeah. No,
I was just going to thank you all
Sure.
so much for listening and giving me some of your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, let's give them a round of applause.